Alright, I think I'm recording, so I think I'm ready to go. Welcome to this week's lecture. Um, this lecture is about detecting deception, but it's actually a pretty long lecture because it combines the lecture material that involves confession. So I'll see how long I can make it. Hopefully, I'll get through the whole thing. I won't go on tangents here and get it all done in one long bit. But if not, I'll split it up into two sections. But um, we'll first start off by talking about detecting deception, and we'll begin by basically just asking what is lying, right? So what exactly is deception, and we'll take a look at why it might be useful, and why we lie all the time as humans, and how come we're not so good at detecting when we're being lied to. So what is lying? It's a statement that the stating party believes to be false and that is made with the intention to deceive. So two components to a lie is that you know it's false, so you know it's not true, but you're saying it anyway, and your intention is to deceive somebody. So lying doesn't always have to be bad, right? There are such things as white lies or good lies. Lying is actually pretty useful in terms of human interaction. You can imagine if we were honest about everything all the time, we probably wouldn't have very many friends, probably wouldn't have any jobs, or any type of social interactions or partners or anything like that. Um, so the practice of communicating lies is known as lying, and the person who is communicating a lie may be referred to as a liar. So as I said, or was alluding to, lies serve a variety of instrumental, interpersonal, and psychological functions. So sometimes we lie just to get ahead in in life. And it's nothing necessarily interpersonal or psychological. It's just we go to buy a new car and they ask us how much we can afford. Uh, as a monthly payment, it's in your best interest to lie, right? That would be like an instrumental type of lying. An interpersonal lie would be if your partner asks you whether they look good in a particular outfit. You're probably going to want to say yes to that. And psychological lies, well, we do that to ourselves all the time, right? They're called defense mechanisms. As we lie to ourselves to feel better about ourselves. So lying is really kind of instrumental, or let's say invaluable. And Louis C.K. kind of nailed this um, in this little skit here when he's talking about lying and his daughter when she discovered the usefulness of lying. So let's have a listen. Maybe I should unmute it first.
I
Let's go back.
I try to be a good dad, but like the life just kind of takes off. Kids start, they get their own ideas, and my 9 year old, she's just figuring out about lying, and that's a tough thing. It's hard to roll that one back because lying is pretty amazingly useful in life. It's like, how do you tell a kid not to use a thing that just solves every possible problem, like magic? How do you? Because that's why kids lie, because they're in trouble. They lie because they're in more trouble than they can take. Because kids, when a 9 year old lies, it's not for some weird Machiavellian, Do you know what my teacher said about you? It's interesting. They don't just make shit up. They lie because they're in trouble. And it's more than they get, because trouble is too much for a kid. Trouble, for grown-ups, we can take trouble. We don't care. We just go, oh, I'm sorry. Am I in trouble? Whoops. We don't care. But to a little kid, trouble is like this horrible, did you take the chocolates? And she did, and she doesn't know how to handle it. Did you take it? No. Well, all right then, have a nice day. How do you then tell her, yeah, don't ever apply that perfect solution again to terrifying things?
Okay, so clearly lying is useful, right? And that's why we do it all the time. So why do we lie? Well, depending on the situation, right? Sometimes we're in a tough spot. Sometimes we took those cookies and we're in trouble and we don't know how to handle it. So we'll lie to get out of those tricky situations. Or maybe a friend or a lover asked us a difficult question that we probably not in our best interest to be perfectly honest about at that point. So we will lie to get out of that situation. As I said before, we lie to ourselves all the time, mostly to ease cognitive dissonance, to make excuses for ourselves so we don't have to change our behavior or change our sense of self. Basically, we lie to protect our self-esteem, which hopefully we know by now is incredibly important. We go out of our way to protect our self-esteem. And of course, for evolutionary factors, lying is very important for good interpersonal skills and good survival skills. And this next video I'll show you features Hank Green, who will talk a little bit about the science of lying and how we might have reached this point where we lie constantly, and yet we're really kind of bad at detecting when we're being lied to. So it's a bit of a paradox, but let's see what he has to say about it.
Hey y'all, time for 2 truths and a lie. I'm gonna tell you 3 things about myself, and you're gonna have to pick out the one that is not true. Ready? Okay. Number 1, I have a machine at home that transforms plain water into carbonated water. 2, I'm really bad at the card game Set. Or 3, Michael Jackson is my aunt. Isn't that obvious? Yeah. God, so bad at game. Lying. We do it a lot. And we're a lot better at it than you'd like to think. Like, I'm not stupid. I could totally have made up a better lie than Michael Jackson is my aunt. But check it out. The fact that I appeared to be terrible at lying was, in fact, a lie. In a 10-minute conversation with a stranger, we humans will tell an average of 3 lies. Researchers who study lying say that the subjects of these lying studies rarely even realize that they're doing it. But why? What purpose does lying actually serve? Well, to put human deception into perspective, it's worth pointing out that humans aren't the only fibbers in nature. My favorite anecdotal example of non-human lying, Coco the gorilla, who was taught sign language back in the 1970s, once actually blamed her pet kitten for ripping a sink out of the wall in her room. Bad all ball. So yeah, lying is nothing new in nature, but why do humans specifically do so much of it? Well, as I've mentioned here before on SciShow, humans are first and foremost social animals. We've got really super huge brains, and that's mainly because we need them for all the interacting we're always doing. For humans, successful social interaction is key to success in much of our lives. So it's clear that lying is a great way of keeping elaborate social structures running smoothly while looking out for number 1. For instance, if you can keep your social group happy, you're going to reap all kinds of benefits like food, higher social standing, more and better sexual partners. And you don't make friends and influence people going around saying things like, actually, that loincloth does make your butt look big. Or, hey, I have been having sex with your brother while you're out hunting mastodons, so little Glurg over there is probably your cave nephew. So the ability to lie and to detect a lie became pretty important to early humans because lying is actually not very easy for a brain to do. And it actually caused a bit of an evolutionary arms race. So people started to get better and better at lying, and better liars got better stuff while hopefully remaining in good standing with their communities. By the same token, those who were better at detecting lies were cheated on by their mates and screwed over in camel trades a lot less often. So yes, now we've evolved to be good liars and also good at spotting bad liars. But as societies became more sophisticated, folks were like, okay, enough with the lying! Because there are lots of advantages to living in tight-knit communities and structured societies, but you can't really have them when you don't know for sure if the kids you're raising are yours and if the camel you just bought has ever been in an accident or whatever. So a society in which bold-faced lying goes completely unchecked leads to total anarchy. So organized societies started putting the hammer down. Religious systems began to drive home the point that God rewards and cares for the truthful and punishes liars. So if you could survive being thrown into the pond and tied up with a sack of hammers, God was on your side and you were telling the truth. If not, you were obviously lying. Oh, medieval European judicial system, how I love you. Even now in modern times, there are laws that prohibit lying and override even our rights to free speech. For instance, you go to jail for lying in a court of law, or for lying about having received a Medal of Honor for service in the armed forces. Don't do that. Also, because you're not evil. Why would someone do that? So lying, it's not okay. But we're also good at it, and our brains want to do it. And we start lying really early. Some researchers say as early as 6 months old. I mean, you've seen a baby fake cry, right? It's very obvious. Like, they're crying, and then they check to see if anybody's coming over to sympathize, and then they're like, oh, I'm gonna keep crying then. Scientists think that this is the time when babies are actually learning how to be better liars. By the time a kid's in college, they're lying to their mom about once in every 5 interactions. And actually that seems low to me. I would say 5 out of 5 for my college experience. Kids these days, actually kids every day. By the time we're adults, we've gotten so very good at lying that we're actually able to do it to ourselves very effectively. The trick to lying to yourself is in the holding of 2 pieces of conflicting information in your head at the same time, and paying attention to one while ignoring the other. People who are good liars can hold a bunch of conflicting information in their heads all at once and keep track of it all. Take pathological liars, people who habitually and compulsively lie, cheat, and manipulate other people. The thing about pathological liars is that they're super good at self-deception. At the moment they're telling it, they wholeheartedly believe their own lie. Interestingly enough, there's an actual difference between the brains of a normal person and the brain of a pathological liar. That difference is in the very front of the brain in a place called the prefrontal cortex. Most neuroscience studies focus on the gray matter of the brain. That's the material that actually processes information. However, nearly half of our brains is made up of what's called white matter, which is composed of connective tissues that carry electrical signals from one group of neurons to another. So gray matter is where all the processing happens, and white matter connects the different parts of the brain. In a study at the University of Southern California, researchers found that pathological liars have about 25% more white matter in their prefrontal cortex than the rest of us, suggesting that pathological liars can make a bunch of connections in their brain really fast. And that lets them keep all the information in order that they need to sustain the lie, also to read the person that they're lying to, suppress their emotions, and probably believe what they're saying on top of it all. So, why haven't pathological liars taken over the world? I mean, they seem to be the next step in human evolution. While pathological liars have a surplus of white matter, they also have around 14% less gray matter than other people. And gray matter is where all the critical thinking happens. So the white matter is all like, I'm gonna tell Jim I used to be a fighter pilot. And the gray matter is all, I could tell Jim I used to be a fighter pilot, but I probably shouldn't because that would jeopardize my relationship with Tammy. So extreme liars have a really hard time maintaining relationships and holding down jobs because after a while everybody realizes that they're full of crap and they get dumped or fired, which is not ideal for the person. It's great for everyone else. But if there are these super liars out there, how do we know if we're being lied to? And I mean, lie detectors might be able to pick up signals like change in the liar's voice or increased heart rate or sweating, all stuff that we do when we're fibbing outright. But a really good liar might not display any of those symptoms. Well, no matter how good of a liar you are, the fact that you are lying will often leak out both through your body language and through your word choices. Let's look at a sample sentence. Believe me, I was not the one who farted and evacuated that movie theater. So do you believe me? Probably not, because I did 3 things in that sentence that made you totally certain that I was in fact the person who made them evacuate the movie theater. To wit, 1, I said, believe me, liars will always say that, or to be totally honest, or Richard Nixon's favorite, in all candor. 2, I all of a sudden stopped using contractions. Liars often use more formal language to deny something that they've actually done. And 3, I said that movie theater instead of the movie theater. I was trying to distance myself from the whole situation. We think of liars as being fidgety, but we actually tend to freeze our upper bodies when we lie. We make more, not less eye contact, maybe a little too much to overcompensate for telling a fib. Liars will also do things like shake their heads while saying yes, and smile when they're done telling a story, even if it's a terrible one. All of this stuff, the reading of what we leak through our words and bodies, is actually the future of lie detection, training law enforcement officers to read potential criminals to catch them in the act of lying. Of course, they're always coming up with new kinds of gadgets all the time, too. Eye trackers, MRI brain scanners that are going to replace the old lie detector tests. Maybe I'll tell my 2 truths and a lie in a brain scanner, see how it does.
I'm pretty sure we all know how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, you're right. I'm a terrible liar. What am I? Thank you for watching this infusion. All of the facts contained within are not lies, we promise, but if you want to check, there are citations in the description, of course, because we're scientists here. If you have ideas for future episodes of Infusions, you can leave those in the comments.
Okay, so Hank Green there offered up a couple of say common ways in order to determine whether or not somebody is lying. One thing that makes lie detecting difficult is that you kind of need to establish a baseline, right? So Hank Green there was saying, you know, people who lie tend to do this or they tend to do that, except that not everybody will. We'll see in a minute that it's definitely more helpful to evaluate people's body language while they're lying, but it's also pretty important to kind of get a baseline, because somebody who is kind of rigid to begin with, you might mistake them for lying because you don't really know them when they're not lying. So we'll see later on when we talk about confessions and interrogation. A big part of interrogation is to spend a lot of time kind of just chatting with your perpetrator or your suspect to get them comfortable, so you can get a baseline reading. What are they doing with their hands when they're just talking about, say, baseball or their jobs or something, right? Where are they looking when they're just talking about the weather? And then when you start noticing changes in what they're doing with their hands, or where they're looking, or how their body is positioned, or the type of words that they're using, it's those changes that are really important. So even though, yeah, when people are lying, you know, there's some general overall patterns, they don't really hold up for everybody. A much more effective way, we'll see, is try to get a baseline. But when it comes to detecting lies, most people are no better than chance. We could just flip a coin 50-50, except that, you know, we're pretty good at determining or detecting bad liars, right? So people who are really kind of crappy at lying, we could pick that up fairly easily. But, you know, a decent liar or a good liar is hard to detect, and we'll see that that's not just true of us, but it's true of people who have training in this area, including myself, right? So one of the reasons why people in general tend to be bad at detecting lies is that we tend to focus on what somebody is saying rather than how they're behaving. And what comes out of somebody's mouth is very easily manipulated. It's pretty easy to just change the words coming out of your mouth. Body language is a much better indicator. Why? Well, because lying actually produces a physiological arousal. It makes us uncomfortable. Not just a physiological arousal, we'll also see it produces a psychological or cognitive arousal. Lying is not easy, particularly if it's an elaborate lie. There are lots of pieces that we have to keep track of, and it's pretty easy to trip up somebody by asking them to tell their story, to tell their lie, essentially, several times, but just a little bit each time, and ask for a little bit more detail, and ask the same types of questions over and over again, but change them slightly, so it sounds like a new question, because it's going to be hard for the person who is lying, who's deceiving you, to kind of keep track of all of that stuff. So some verbal cues, as we saw Hank Green say, can predict deceptive behavior, but again, not always. It's always good to get a baseline there. But people who are telling the truth will tend to report more details and are more likely to say that they can't recall certain details. So human memory is not good. If you haven't learned that already in cognitive psych, you're going to learn it in this class when we get to victim and eyewitness testimony and memory. It kind of sucks. So we would expect people who are telling the truth to say that they don't remember or that they can't recall. People who have an answer for everything and who have an answer for every minute type of detail when pressed for it, but they don't offer up those details. They speak very vaguely when they're giving their narrative, but all of a sudden they have a whole bunch of details when they're asked, specifically. That's a little suspicious in there. Also, liars tend to speak in a higher pitched voice, and they'll tend to make more speech errors. So more slip of the tongues or Freudian type of slips. What else we got? We see that if you use a particular type of interview technique called the cognitive load interview, cognitive load interview is designed to wear a person down mentally, because lying takes a lot of cognitive energy. If you give them a whole bunch of storylines to keep track of, or if you give them a whole bunch of other type of say cognitively taxing type of questions that they need to answer, it might actually wear down their ability to lie. So they'll start slipping up because it just becomes too difficult to simultaneously answer a difficult or cognitively difficult question and to maintain this lie, particularly if it's an elaborate lie. So what will happen is before a person's being interrogated or questioned, they will typically prepare themselves for the type of questions that they expect to be asked. So they will rehearse answers to questions that they're expecting you to ask them. So, what can you do? If they're practicing, well, ask the questions that they don't expect you to ask. The questions that they didn't rehearse any answers to. And sometimes that's as simple as asking what kind of shirt, what color shirt was the person wearing, or how many drinks did you have before you left the bar? in the person's mind, they might just be saying, well, I'm going to say I was at the bar, I had some drinks, and then I left. Okay, well, what was the bartender's name? Oh shit, I didn't think about that, right? I didn't rehearse that. So sometimes these details are important, especially if it's like, just for example, someone saying they spent 5 hours at a bar when this murder was happening, so that's their alibi. Okay, maybe you don't know the bartender's name, but what was he or she wearing? What color shirt did they have on? Should be able to remember that, right? They kept serving you drinks all night, so that's not a question that most people would rehearse. They're not really expecting investigators or interrogators to ask that type of question. Another thing that you can do to try trip up somebody who is deceiving you is to ask them to tell their story in reverse. Because again, liars or people who are intending to deceive are going to be rehearsing a story, and they'll do so linearly. So in their head, they have the story practiced, and they have it rehearsed, and they've been going through it and sticking to it, but they only planned it in one direction. They only rehearsed it in one direction. So ask them, okay, let's walk backwards, right? Now just imagine how difficult that is for just stuff we don't lie about. Like, go ahead, do the alphabet backwards, starting from Z. It's gonna be a lot harder to go backwards than it is the way that we've been practicing it for all these years in that ABC song, right? So this could be cognitively taxing on the suspect as well, and get them to slip up. What you want to do is, before you present any evidence, is you want to have a thorough interrogation where you're trying to get as much information from this person as possible, get them to tell their story in as many different ways as possible, before you present any type of evidence. Before you say, we know you did it because we have a security camera. That's going to kind of end all of the interrogation. That's going to kind of end any of their deception, any of their ability to try to get out of this situation. And it's through that type of interrogation, especially when it's done correctly, where you're going to learn about what actually happened. You're gathering evidence through an interrogation, right? So I forgot we have this TED Talk here. A little bit long, but let's get through it. It's pretty good, and it deals with lie detection from one of the nation's experts in body language or nonverbal communication. So let's see what she has to say. And I might step away for a few minutes, but I'll be back. I promise. Just keep watching.
Okay, now I don't want to alarm anybody in this room, but it's just come to my attention that the person to your right is a liar. Also, the person to your left is a liar. Also, the person sitting in your very seats is a liar. We're all liars. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you what the research says about why we're all liars, how you can become a lie spotter, and why you might want to go the extra mile and go from lie spotting to truth seeking, and ultimately to trust building. Now, speaking of trust, ever since I wrote this book, Lie Spotting, No one wants to meet me in person anymore. No, 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 no. They say, it's okay. We'll email you. I can't even get a coffee date at Starbucks. My husband's like, honey, deception. Maybe you could have focused on cooking. How about French cooking? So before we get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clarify my goal for you, which is not to teach a game of gotcha. Lie spotters aren't those nitpicky kids, those kids in the back of the room that are shouting, gotcha, gotcha. Your eyebrow twitched. You flared your nostril. I watched that TV show, Lie to Me. I know you're lying. No. Lie spotters are armed with scientific knowledge of how to spot deception. They use it to get to the truth, and they do what mature leaders do every day. They have difficult conversations with difficult people, sometimes during very difficult times. And they start up that path by accepting a core proposition. And that proposition is the following: lying is a cooperative act. Think about it. A lie has no power whatsoever by its mere utterance. Its power emerges when someone else agrees to believe the lie. So I know it may sound like tough love, but look, if at some point you got lied to, it's because you agreed to get lied to. Truth number one about lying: lying's a cooperative act. Now, not all lies are harmful. Sometimes we're willing participants in deception for the sake of social dignity, maybe to keep a secret that should be kept secret. We say, nice song. Honey, you don't look fat in that, no. Or we say, favorite of the digerati. You know, I just fished that email out of my spam folder. I'm so sorry. But there are times when we are unwilling participants in deception, and that can have dramatic costs for us. Last year saw $997 billion in corporate fraud alone in the United States. That's an eyelash under $1 trillion. That's 7% of revenues. Deception can cost billions. Think Enron, Madoff, the mortgage crisis, or in the case of double agents and traitors like Robert Hansen or Aldrich Ames, lies can betray our country. They can compromise our security. They can undermine democracy. They can cause the deaths of those that defend us. Deception is actually serious business. This con man, Henry Oberlander, he was such an effective con man, British authorities say he could have undermined the entire banking system of the Western world. And you can't find this guy on Google. You can't find him anywhere. He was interviewed once, and he said the following. He said, look, I've got one rule. And this was Henry's rule. He said, look, everyone is willing to give you something. They're ready to give you something for whatever it is they're hungry for. And that's the crux of it. If you don't want to be deceived, you have to know, what is it that you're hungry for? And we all kind of hate to admit it. You know, we kind of wish we were better husbands, better wives, smarter, more powerful, taller, richer, the list goes on. Lying is an attempt to bridge that gap, to connect our wishes and our fantasies about who we wish we were, how we wish we could be, with what we're really like. And boy, are we willing to fill in those gaps in our lives with lies. On a given day, studies show that you may be lied to anywhere from 10 to 200 times. Now, granted, many of those are white lies. But in another study, it showed that strangers lied 3 times within the first 10 minutes of meeting each other. Now, when we first hear this data, we recoil. We can't believe how prevalent lying is. We're essentially against lying. But if you look more closely, the plot actually thickens. We lie more to strangers than we lie to coworkers. Extroverts lie more than introverts. Men lie 8 times more about themselves than they do other people. Women lie more to protect other people. If you're in an average married couple, you're going to lie to your spouse in 1 out of every 10 interactions. Now, you may think that's bad. If you're unmarried, that number drops to 3. Lying's complex. It's woven into the fabric of our daily and our business lives. We're deeply ambivalent about the truth. We parse it out on an as-needed basis, sometimes for very, very good reasons, and other times just because we don't understand the gaps in our lives. That's truth number 2 about lying. We're against lying, but we're covertly for it in ways that our society has sanctioned for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's as old as breathing. It's part of our culture. It's part of our history. Think Dante, Shakespeare, the Bible, news of the world. Lying has evolutionary value to us as a species. Researchers have long known that the more intelligent the species, the larger the neocortex, the more likely it is to be deceptive. Now, you might remember Coco. Does anybody here remember Coco the gorilla, who was taught sign language? Coco was taught to communicate via sign language. Here's Coco with her kitten. It's her cute little fluffy pet kitten. Coco once blamed her pet kitten for ripping a sink out of the wall. We're hardwired to become leaders of the pack. It starts really, really early. How early? Well, babies will fake a cry, pause, wait to see who's coming, and then go right back to crying. 1-year-olds learn concealment. 2-year-olds bluff. 5-year-olds lie outright. They manipulate via flattery. 9-year-olds, masters of the cover-up. By the time you enter college, you're going to lie to your mom in 1 out of every 5 interactions. By the time we enter this work world, and we're breadwinners, we enter a world that is just cluttered with spam, fake digital friends, partisan media, ingenious identity thieves, world-class Ponzi schemers, a deception epidemic. In short, what one author calls a post-truth society. It's been very confusing for a long time now. What do? Well, there's steps we can take to navigate our way through the morass. Trained lie spotters get to the truth 90% of the time. The rest of us were only 54% accurate. Why is it so easy to learn? Well, they're good liars and they're bad liars. They're no real original liars. We all make the same mistakes. We all use the same techniques. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 2 patterns of deception, and then we're going to look at the hot spots and see if we can find them ourselves. We're going to start with speech.
I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Okay, what were the telltale signs? Well, first we heard what's known as a non-contracted denial. Studies show that people who are overdetermined in their denial will resort to formal rather than informal language. We also heard distancing language, that woman. We know that liars will unconsciously distance themselves from their subject using language as their tool. Now, if Bill Clinton had said, well, to tell you the truth, or Richard Nixon's favorite, in all candor, he would have been a dead giveaway for any lie spotter that knows that qualifying language, as it's called, qualifying language like that, further discredits the subject. Now, if he had repeated the question in its entirety, or if he had peppered his account with a little too much detail, and we're all really glad he didn't do that, he would have further discredited himself. Freud had it right. Freud said, look, there's much more to it than speech. No mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips, and we all do it. No matter how powerful you are, we all chatter with our fingertips. I'm going to show you Dominique Strauss-Kahn with Obama, who's chattering with his fingertips. Now, this brings us to our next pattern, which is body language. With body language, here's what you got to do. You really got to just throw your assumptions out the door. Let the science temper your knowledge a little bit. Because we think liars fidget all the time. Well, guess what? They're known to freeze their upper bodies when they're lying. We think liars won't look in the eyes. Well, guess what? They look you in the eyes a little too much just to compensate for that myth. We think warmth and smiles convey honesty, sincerity, but a trained lie spotter can spot a fake smile a mile away. Can you all spot the fake smile here? You can consciously contract the muscles in your cheeks, but the real smile's in the eyes. The crow's feet of the eyes, they cannot be consciously contracted, especially if you overdid the Botox. Don't overdo the Botox. Nobody will think you're honest. And now we're going to look at the hot spots. Can you tell what's happening in a conversation? Can you start to find the hot spots to see the discrepancies between someone's words and someone's actions? Now, I know it seems really obvious, but when you're having a conversation with someone that you suspect of deception, attitude is by far the most overlooked but telling of indicators. An honest person is going to be cooperative. They're going to show they're on your side. They're going to be enthusiastic. They're going to be willing and helpful in getting you to the truth. They're going to be willing to brainstorm, name suspects, provide details. They're going to say, hey, maybe it was those guys in payroll that forged those checks. They're going to be infuriated if they sense they're wrongly accused throughout the entire course of the interview, not just in flashes. They'll be infuriated throughout the entire course of the interview. And if you ask someone honest, what should happen to whoever did forge those checks? An honest person is much more likely to recommend strict rather than lenient punishment. Now, let's say you're having that exact same conversation with someone deceptive. That person may be withdrawn, look down, lower their voice, pause, be kind of herky-jerky. Ask a deceptive person to tell their story, they're going to pepper it with way too much detail in all kinds of irrelevant places. And then they're going to tell their story in strict chronological order. And what a trained interrogator does is they come in, and in very subtle ways, over the course of several hours, they will ask that person to tell their story backwards. And then they'll watch them squirm and track which questions produce the highest volume of deceptive tells. Why do they do that? Well, we all do the same thing. We rehearse our words, but we rarely rehearse our gestures. We say yes, we shake our heads no. We tell very convincing stories, we slightly shrug our shoulders. We commit terrible crimes, and we smile at the delight in getting away with it. Now, that smile is known in the trade as duping delight, and we're going to see that in several videos moving forward, but we're going to start. For those of you that don't know him, this is presidential candidate John Edwards, who shocked America by fathering a child out of wedlock. We're going to see him talk about getting a paternity test. See now if you can spot him saying yes while shaking his head no, slightly shrugging his shoulders, lots of
Be happy to participate in one. I know that it's not possible that this child could be mine because of the timing of events, so I know it's not possible. Happy to take a paternity test and would love to see it happen.
Are you going to do that soon? Is there somebody that you can't?
I'm only one side. I'm only one side of the test, but I'm happy to participate in one.
Okay, those head shakes are much easier to spot once you know to look for them. Now, there are going to be times when someone makes one expression while masking another that just kind of leaks through in a flash. Murderers are known to leak sadness. Your new joint venture partner might shake your hand, celebrate, go out to dinner with you, and then leak an expression of anger. And we're not all going to become facial expression experts overnight here, but there's one I can teach you that's very dangerous and that's easy to learn, and that's the expression of contempt. Now, with anger, you've got two people on an even playing field. It's still somewhat of a healthy relationship, but when anger turns to contempt, you've been dismissed. It's associated with moral superiority, and for that reason, it's very, very hard to recover from. Here's what it looks like. It's marked by one lip corner pulled up and in. It's the only asymmetrical expression, and in the presence of contempt, whether or not deception follows, and it doesn't always follow, look the other way, go the other direction, reconsider the deal, say, no, thank you, I'm not coming up for just one more nightcap, thank you. Science has surfaced many, many more indicators. We know, for example, liars will shift their blink rate, point their feet towards an exit. They will take barrier objects and put them between themselves and the person that's interviewing them. They'll alter their vocal tone, often making their vocal tone much lower. Now, here's the deal. These behaviors are just behaviors. They're not proof of deception. They're red flags. We're human beings. We make deceptive, flailing gestures all over the place all day long. They don't mean anything in and of themselves. But when you see clusters of them, that's your signal. Look, listen, probe, ask some hard questions, get out of that very comfortable mode of knowing, walk into curiosity mode, ask more questions. Have a little dignity. Treat the person you're talking to with rapport. Don't try to be like those folks on Law and Order and those other TV shows that pummel their subjects into submission. Don't be too aggressive. It doesn't work. Now, we've talked a little bit about how to talk to someone who's lying and how to spot a lie. And as I promised, we're now going to look at what the truth looks like. And I'm going to show you two videos. Two mothers. One is lying, one is telling the truth. And these were surfaced by researcher David Matsumoto in California. And I think they're an excellent example of what the truth looks like. This mother, Diane Downs, shot her kids at close range, drove them to the hospital while they bled all over the car, claimed a scraggy-haired stranger did it. And you'll see when you see the video, she can't even pretend to be an agonizing mother. What you want to look for here is an incredible discrepancy between horrific events that she describes and her very, very cool demeanor. And if you look closely, you'll see duping delight throughout this video.
But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that Maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
Now I'm going to show you a video of an actual grieving mother, Erin Runyon, confronting her daughter's murderer and torturer in court. Here you're going to see no false emotion, just the authentic expression of a mother's agony.
I wrote the statement on the 3rd anniversary of the night you took my baby. And you hurt her, and you crushed her, you terrified her, until her heart stopped. Then she fought, and I know she fought you. I know she looked at you with those amazing brown eyes, and you still wanted to kill her. And I don't understand it, and I never will.
Okay, there's no doubting the veracity of those emotions. Now, the technology around what the truth looks like is progressing on, the science of it. We know, for example, that we now have specialized eye trackers, infrared brain scans, MRIs that can decode the signals that our bodies send out when we're trying to be deceptive. And these technologies are going to be marketed to all of us as panaceas for deceit. And they will prove incredibly useful someday. But you've got to ask yourself, in the meantime, who do you want on your side in the meeting? Someone who's trained in getting to the truth, or some guy who's going to drag a 400-pound electroencephalogram through the door? Lie spotters rely on human tools. They know, as someone once said, character's who you are in the dark. And what's kind of interesting is that today we have so little darkness. Our world is lit up 24 hours a day. It's transparent, with blogs and social networks broadcasting the buzz of a whole new generation of people that have made a choice to live their lives in public. It's a much more noisy world. So one challenge we have is to remember, oversharing, that's not honesty. Our manic tweeting and texting can blind us to the fact that the subtleties of human decency, character, integrity, that's still what matters. That's always what's going to matter. So in this much noisier world, it might make sense for us to be just a little bit more explicit about our moral code. When you combine the science of recognizing deception with the art of looking, listening, you exempt yourself from collaborating in a lie. You start up that path of being just a little bit more explicit because you signal to everyone around you. You say, hey, my world, our world, it's going to be an honest one. My world is going to be one where truth is strengthened and falsehood is recognized and marginalized. And when you do that, the ground around you starts to shift just a little bit. And that's the truth. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that TED Talk as much as I do. She's a great researcher, very distinguished in the field, and spot on with everything that she said, and especially when she was stressing caution in terms of some of the newer technologies that are coming out, which we'll talk about in a little bit here, using MRIs or fMRIs or some of these other brain scan technologies, eye tracking technologies to serve as lie detectors. I'm not convinced. And maybe it's just because the science there doesn't quite exist. But also because the human brain, there's no real lie center of our brain, right? There are certain parts of our brain that are more responsible for certain behaviors and certain emotions and certain, cognitions than other parts of the brain. The brain operates as an entire system. And when we see these images of brain scans, we'll say, here's a brain of a liar, and here's a brain of a non-liar. Take a look at the differences in the areas. Okay, what am I really looking at here? I just see some blue pixelated areas and some red pixelated areas. So, and is that just one person compared to another person? Because a lot of times those images are actually composites of several people. The image of a liar is actually the average of 25 people who were lying compared to an average image of 25 people who weren't lying. So I don't know. I'm gonna say the verdict is out on that. No pun intended, this being a second law class. But we already been through this stuff with the polygraph machine, right? So those of you who aren't familiar with the polygraph, it's we spoke a little bit about it. It's what basically led to the Frye standard of what's admissible evidence in court or not. But it's a machine that measures galvanic skin response of sweating, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, some measure a couple other physiological responses, but those are the main ones. So are those all necessarily indicators of lying? Well, no, they're not actually, because we get excited and sweat and our heart races, not just when we're lying, but when we're scared, when we're happy, when we're excited, when we're anxious, right? Like there's a whole bunch of emotions that can produce these physiological responses, and that's all that the polygraph does is measure these physiological responses. So sometimes just being suspected of a crime, even when you're innocent, might produce a whole lot of emotions. Sometimes the type of questions that they're asking you might be pretty freaking horrific. You could imagine, you know, any of you who are in relationships now, God forbid, you know, your partner ends up dead somewhere. Who's the prime suspect? You're it, right? Especially if you're a guy, you are the main suspect. So they're going to be asking you some pretty horrific questions about your dead partner. Just hearing those things, if you're completely innocent, may very well produce these physiological responses, and you come up as lying when you're not. Likewise, some people are able to control these types of physiological responses. Granted, it's more difficult for most people. You can actually train yourself to beat a polygraph. I'll show you a video of how to do it, of a guy who actually made quite a bit of money by training people how to beat a polygraph. So the polygraph as a lie detector, nah, it's not acceptable in most jurisdictions and most courtrooms. It might actually be more appropriate for what we call a concealed knowledge test, which we'll get to in a moment. Yeah, I'll save that. I won't spoil it because I'll just end up repeating myself. So let's just take a look in terms of how this polygraph actually works, or how it's supposed to work here.
There's people that can be stone cold and lie to you right in your face, but yet their brain tells the truth. My name is Dan Ribicoff. I'm a private investigator and a polygraph examiner.
I'm Joel Reicheter, and I teach physiology to students who are preparing to become polygraph examiners.
Everybody knows what the lie detector or the polygraph is, and it's used extensively by the NSA, the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, as well as almost every law enforcement agency in the civilized world.
Polygraph is structured on fear of detection, because of the consequences of the truth coming out. Lie detector. There's no such device. If that was the case, we could close all the courts, probably fire all the attorneys, and just give a lie detector. It's a casual social term that's used, but it doesn't have any scientific basis. What we do have is the technology to determine with a high degree of probability truth from deception by monitoring the various body responses to a series of questions that have to be carefully crafted.
We're going to ask you questions that we know are true. Are you sitting down now? And then we're going to ask you questions that we don't know. And we're going to look to see how you react and how much energy your brain calls for. When you tell the truth, you use your memory. When you lie, you must use your imagination. Probably the best analogy would be your hard drive and your processor. When you use your processor in the computer, you notice your fan comes on because you start using more energy. It's the same thing with your body. Your brain is going to call for more energy when you lie versus giving me the truth when you answer your name or today's date or whether or not you're sitting down. Polygraphs are done by comparison. We compare other reactions against the unknown.
If you're the guilty person and you perceive some questions as more threatening, you're going to get a bigger response compared to other questions that are less threatening.
Well, this reaction is significant, more so than the other reaction, so therefore we're going to say deception indicated, which, simplifying it, would be, no deception indicated, deception indicated, meaning that there's a dramatic reaction compared to your known truths. Is your name John? Are you sitting down? The bigger the issue, the bigger the lie, the bigger the reaction is really the way it works.
How I conduct the interview, the question decisions I make, they're based in science, but there's some art in it. Reluctantly, I'm saying that. I wish there wasn't.
It's almost like an X-ray. Sometimes you see a shadow and you say, well, you know what, maybe it's a spot, we have to biopsy it, and sometimes it's crystal clear.
There's both mental countermeasures and physical countermeasures, such as, for instance, counting numbers backwards by 3, starting with 100, squeezing of the buttocks, pressing toes down on the floor in your shoe. Of course, the more primitive ones is holding your breath or altering your breath patterns.
People try biting the inside of their gums, biting their lips, to basically try to cause reactions on certain questions to deceive the polygraph instrument. It's very difficult to get it to look natural.
Just to read about the countermeasures and then have a naive subject practice them during a polygraph test usually is ineffective.
If you haven't sat in front of a polygraph machine and tried to make these reactions look natural, you're making the needles fly off the charts. That's in itself a sign of deception. There's only one reason to try to beat a polygraph test. You're lying.
Okay, so clearly we see that younger guy was a little bit more cocky when it comes to the efficacy, reliability of the polygraph. That older guy was much more humble and much more honest about the limitations of the polygraph. Yeah, just reading about these ways to beat the polygraph and then going in there, people are probably going to know what's up, that you're trying to throw off the machine. And yeah, they might take that as a clear sign. Well, you're trying to fuck with the machine, so you're lying, right? But the result is still going to come out as inconclusive, so you're still going to beat it, so to speak. However, what that older gentleman didn't mention is that with practice, you can actually beat it, in the true sense is that those needles won't be flying anywhere. It's a matter, well, I have a whole video that discusses it from the expert who taught mob bosses how to beat this polygraph. So I'll leave it to the expert there, but it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible to do, and not all that difficult. It takes some practice and perseverance. Now, when it comes to the polygraph as a lie detector, I'm glad that both of those individuals, remember, they're both polygraph examiners, so they're gonna be a little biased in favor of their machine. But there is some research, objective research, to suggest that using the polygraph during a concealed or as a concealed knowledge test could actually be helpful. So here the goal is not to determine whether or not someone is lying, but instead to determine whether or not somebody is withholding some information. So the goal is to detect the presence of concealed knowledge in the suspect's mind, because there's no such thing as a lie detector, right? All we can do is detect. Now, the way they phrased it in that last video is saying that some questions are more threatening than others, but not necessarily threatening. Some questions just might be more arousing than others, right? If you can imagine if someone said, "Did you stab your mother to death did you stab your mother in the heart 15 times until she bled out on the kitchen floor?" Wouldn't you expect somebody, even if they're innocent, to physiological reaction there? It might not be a threatening question. It just might be a horrific question, right? So when we use the polygraph in these concealed knowledge tests, what the polygraph examiner will do is ask a question as a multiple choice question. So you can ask somebody, where is the body? Where was the body dumped? Was it A, on the side of a road, and we don't see any type of reaction going on, right? Or it's level. Was it B, by the river? Whoosh, things start going off the chart. C, buried in the desert, things start getting lower, the needles start getting more calm, right? Or D, left at the crime scene. The levels are kind of the same. Well, there's only really one option there that things started spiking off the chart. So chances are this person, and if the body actually was dumped by the river, chances are this person knows that information, right? Because they certainly had a physiological response when that option was presented to them. So each answer would appear equally plausible to an innocent person. So all of those options, if you had no idea where the body was dumped, you should respond exactly the same way to all of those options. But a true criminal will, in theory at least, be revealed by this heightened physiological type of arousal that occurs. Let me show you how to beat this lie detector or this polygraph. If you ever get in trouble, probably never a good idea to take a polygraph. Well, yes and no. Let's watch this first, and then I'll explain. Sometimes you can get a plea deal, but if you pass the polygraph, you'll no longer be considered a suspect, and charges will be dropped. But if you fail it, then they can use it against you in court. I don't know if that's a risk that I would take. I don't trust the machine. Not that I don't trust the machine, I don't trust the people who are administering that test. They tend to have a lot of faith in the ability of that polygraph as a lie detector, and anybody who has that much confidence in something, I don't trust. But let's go ahead and watch this video so you can beat the lie detector if you ever get asked to take one. Don't tell anyone I taught you any of this stuff.
I ran polygraph examinations, thousands of them, between 1972 and 1979. And I never once believed that the polygraph was capable of detecting deception. Fear has a definite, distinct smell, a combination of shit and spinach. For 7 years, I would smell that fear every day in my office. It was there when I closed up the office every night, and it was there to greet me the next morning when I entered the office. Polygraph is not a test. It's an intense interrogation, and the only part the polygraph plays is to frighten and intimidate a person into making a confession or an admission. It doesn't record truth or deception. There is no such thing as a lying reaction. It records nervousness. The reaction that would brand you as a liar only indicates deception about 50% of the time. Anybody can pass any lie detector test by simply duplicating the physiological response to fear on demand at the appropriate time. What the polygraph records is your blood pressure, your pulse rate. It also shows what's called the galvanic skin response. That's where electrodes are placed on the first and third fingers of your right hand, and it records the sweat activity in your hand. Then there are pneumograph tubes placed around your chest and stomach that record your breathing. Any number of innocent stimuli can and do cause the exact same reaction that would brand you as a liar. And the more well-developed your sense of conscience, the more likely you are to flunk a polygraph examination, and the more of an old thief and the more hardened your conscience, the better your chances of passing it. Take a quarter out of your pocket and flip that sucker. If it's heads, they're lying. If it's tails, they're telling the truth. That's exactly the same degree of accuracy that this polygraph instrument has. In order to pass a polygraph examination, you have to understand how polygraph is scored. There are two different types of questions, relevant and control. Now, the relevant questions are obviously those that pertain to the point at issue. Is your first name Jenna?
Yes.
Did you tell the complete truth on your job application?
Yes.
Control questions then are interspersed. Have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever lied to anyone who trusted you? Besides what you've told me, have you ever lied to get out of trouble?
No.
You have to show no reaction whatsoever on the relevant questions. Is your first name Jenna? That's your first relevant. Nice and calm and even, no major fluctuations at all. And you have to show a reaction on the control questions, because what they do is they compare your reactions. Now here's your first control question. See how high that GSR went, how erratic the breathing? You can tell that. I can take that across the street and you can tell which question bothered you.
Yeah.
And here's relevant again. Nice and calm, nice and calm, nice and calm. Now how do you do this? So utterly simple. On all the relevant questions, you think about laying on the beach and watching the waves gently rolling into the shore. Thinking nice, calm, relaxing thoughts. Is there anything in your background that would disqualify you from getting this job?
No.
On the control questions, you think about falling off of a building and smashing your guts out on the sidewalk below. Besides what you've told me, have you ever stolen anything else?
No.
Thinking of that frightening scenario induces a stress reaction that causes a reaction on the control questions. No reaction on the relevance, reaction on the controls. Pass. Freshly ground coffee. Can't be beat. For the past 35 years, I have dedicated my life to exposing the waste, fraud, and abuse in the polygraph industry. And as a reward, the government is now trying to imprison me for upwards of 100 years and fine me $1.5 million. How dare you file federal criminal charges against me for protesting the use of this polygraph and demonstrating what a ridiculous instrument it is. The devil hates to be mocked, and I'm mocking them every chance I get, exposing them for frauds, con men, and manipulative bastards.
Okay, so how cool is that guy, right? Definitely, he's a cop who broke bad or good. I don't know. He broke to the side of the people, let's say, by exposing this stuff. Where did I go? I hit something. It messed me up here. Sorry, if I'm making anybody dizzy here. Okay, sorry about that. So, in terms of how the polygraph is actually used in criminal cases, don't even. It's too late. I've been doing this too long. Don't mess with me, Prezi. Okay, so there are two ways in which the polygraph can be used in about a third of the states. A suspect can take a polygraph test with the understanding that the prosecutor will drop the charges if the person passes the test, but that the results can be used in court if the suspect doesn't pass the test. So this is what I mentioned before. I wouldn't do it. Luckily, we're not in one of those states in New York, but if you ever find yourself in one of those states, that's polygraph results are damning evidence. People really believe these things are lie detectors. So to have this in court and to have a jury hear this type of evidence, when it's probably a 50-50 shot that you're going to fail this thing, I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take that gamble there. But another way that polygraph results are used are that sometimes suspects who take a polygraph exam, they'll do so at the urging of their own attorney in order to determine whether or not the person is lying, because attorneys believe this machine is a lie detector and cops believe it's a lie detector. But sometimes an attorney will advise you or press you to take a polygraph, and if you pass, they'll send it along to the police, and usually the police will drop you as a suspect, so you'll no longer be on their radar, so to speak. Not always, but usually. So when it comes to this idea of brain-based lie detection, I already kind of talked some smack about this, because it is starting to trickle its way into courtrooms, and the science just isn't there. So we're running into this whole issue again of having a polygraph being admissible into court, and there's no scientific data that is really backing this stuff up. The evidence is really kind of weak. So when we talk about brain-based lie detection, what we're really talking about is neuroimaging of the brain. So neuroimaging and deception detection, right? This is usually done through the use of fMRIs, and fMRI machines use a very powerful magnet to give static image of the brain, so kind of like an X-ray a three-dimensional X-ray of the brain, but also a metabolic image of the brain. So it does that by using a really powerful magnet to shake up the cells in your head. And deoxygenated blood, blood has iron in it, right? So that's what's used to carry oxygen. Hemoglobin used to carry oxygen throughout the body. So deoxygenated blood is going to have less of a magnetic resonance to it. So take a look at fMRI, it's functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's measuring how much your the cells in your head or in your body are actually vibrating. So areas of the brain that are consuming much more blood have much more iron in them, and those would appear as more resonant. They're going to appear as more energetic. They'll light up on the scan compared to areas of the brain that are using less blood. So according to brain-based lie detection, different patterns of brain activation have been shown to be associated with truth-telling and with lying. Again, this is based on some small studies, so small sample sizes, and not a whole lot of studies either. And it's not like, little old me or anybody at SUNY Oneonta or any of those liberal arts colleges. Not that we have access to an fMRI machine. This type of research is being done in private laboratories and private hospitals or in big university systems that have a lot of grant money. So it's usually just a small group of researchers who have access to this equipment. So not a lot of this stuff is being replicated. And before we accept anything in science, we test the shit out of it. And until we tested and tested and tested and tested and we're proven wrong, we assume it's all bullshit. Again, until we're proven wrong. That's what null hypothesis testing is all about, right? So I don't think we've reached the point where we can say this is not bullshit now. But some of the research that's coming out shows that the accuracy of the method can range from 76% upwards to 90%. Again, who's determining that? Well, a small group of researchers who have access to this equipment and who are interested in brain-based lie detection. So it's not like anybody can replicate this stuff. I want to see it for myself. I want to test it for myself, right? Before I would want it in the courtroom. So despite concerns about the validity of its use under varied conditions, these fMRI techniques are being marketed commercially and are occasionally used in court. And both of those things are really problematic for me, because this means that we are potentially sending innocent people to jail or to their death, so people can make money, right? For a quick buck, and that's disgusting. I don't care which side of the political aisle you're on. That's gross. I hope we could all agree with that. But I'll show you a little video here that deals with neuroimaging and lie detection, and then I think we'll wrap this up, and then I'll do a separate lecture for confession. Otherwise, it's going to be a 3 or 4 hour video. Okay, so let's have a look at this next clip.
As our filming of the trial continues, I'm going to be talking from time to time with law professor Nita Farahani, who has closely followed how neuroscience may affect the law. We started by picking up on the issue of brain scans for lie detection.
How useful is it to bring this kind of lie detection into the court?
Well, it's interesting. If you compare it to traditional lie detection technology, the polygraph, we have excluded polygraph testimony for a long time from the criminal courtroom because it's so unreliable. And the question is, does this do something better? Is looking at the brain instead of the indirect measures of things like sweat and heart palpitations, is that better than the existing polygraph method? And the answer is probably not. Every time we introduce new science into the courtroom, there's an overconfidence by jurors in the science as if that's the objective truth, right? That science has found the objective answer and that they don't have to do the hard work of trying to figure out if the person's telling a truth or a lie because the science tells us that. And it doesn't. It's one more subjective piece of information that informs our decision making. And so a lot of neuroscientists are worried about over-reliance by jurors and over-influence to jurors in the use of this kind of evidence.
So if the preponderance of scientists are worried about introducing these techniques into the courtroom,
right,
are they closer to getting accepted than they ought to be? Or is there still a pretty good barrier about it now?
Well, so there have been several cases so far where judges have actually heard fMRI evidence. And in each of the cases, the judges have been incredibly careful in the opinions that they've written to explain why they don't think that this evidence, fMRI lie detection, reaches a level of reliability and general acceptance in the scientific community that would enable it to be permitted into a criminal case. Nevertheless, as the evidence improves, as the techniques improve, there's no reason to think that it won't one day end up in the criminal courtroom.
And it's very, very troublesome in that regard. So I'm going to end this lecture here, and then I'll take a break and I'll take a stab at trying to knock out this next piece of evaluating confessions. Normally teach this as two separate lectures anyway, so I'll see you in a bit, hopefully. If not, see you tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Okay. See ya.